The porcelain of the antique vase shattered against the marble floor, a sound as sharp and final as a closing door on a life you once knew. For Elara, 9 months pregnant, and on her knees, the sound was her future breaking apart. Her husband, the man who had vowed to protect her, stood over her, with eyes as cold as the raging storm outside. His mother pointed a diamond-ringed finger toward the door, her voice a blade of ice. "Get out! This family has no place for a barren charity case." Barren. But she was carrying his child. In that moment, drenched in rain and betrayal, she had nothing. Little did they know the very ground they stood on, the grand mansion they cherished more than family held a secret. And by the next sunrise, she wouldn't be begging to be let in. She'd be holding the keys to it all. The air in the Blackwood mansion was always heavy, thick with the scent of old money and unspoken resentments. For Elara, it had never felt like home. It was a museum in which she was a temporary and often unwelcome exhibit. Tonight, the air was electric, charged by the storm lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the grand drawing room and the fury brewing within its walls. Julian Blackwood, her husband of 2 years, looked every bit the master of the estate. His dark hair was perfectly coiffed, his bespoke suit uncreased, but his handsome face was twisted into a mask of cruel indifference. Standing beside him, a statue of matriarchal venom, was his mother, Beatrice Blackwood. Her silver hair was arranged in an immaculate chignon, and the formidable Blackwood diamonds at her throat seemed to wink in the firelight, mocking Elara's simple gold locket. The conflict had started over something trivial, a dropped serving dish during dinner with the Vances' potential business partners. But Elara knew it wasn't about the dish. It was never about the small things. It was about her background, her lack of a prestigious family name, her inability until now to provide the one thing Beatrice craved above all else, a legitimate heir. "Clumsy, worthless girl," Beatrice had hissed, her voice carrying across the cavernous dining hall. "You embarrass us. You embarrass the Blackwood name." Now, hours later, the argument had escalated into a full-blown tribunal. Isabella Vance, the daughter of their dinner guest, and Julian's colleague, was here too. She lounged on a velvet chaise, a smug, predatory smile playing on her perfectly glossed lips. She was everything Elara wasn't confident, sharp-tongued and dripping in designer labels. "Julian, darling, it's a matter of standards," Isabella said, her voice a silky purr. "How can your family be expected to close the merger with my father when your domestic situation is so unstable?" Elara clutched her swollen belly, a protective instinct warring with the tremor of fear that ran through her. "It was an accident," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the thunder. "Julian, please." Julian wouldn't look at her. He just stared at the fireplace, his jaw tight. "Mother is right, Elara. This isn't working. It hasn't been working for a long time." "What are you talking about?" A cold dread began to seep into her bones. "We're about to have a baby. Your baby." Beatrice let out a short, barking laugh. "Oh, we are well aware of the situation." She took a step forward, her eyes sweeping over Elara's pregnant form with utter disdain. "But you see, we've had some confirmations, some tests." Elara's brow furrowed in confusion. "Tests? What tests?" "Don't play dumb." Julian finally snapped, turning to face her. His eyes, once the source of her comfort, were now 2 chips of ice. "The doctors have been very clear. There are significant risks, potential defects. We cannot have the Blackwood line tainted." The lie was so audacious, so monstrous, that Elara couldn't even form a response. Her pregnancy had been perfect. Every checkup, every scan had shown a healthy, thriving baby. Dr. Evans had been glowing in her reports. This was a fabrication, a cruel weapon forged to break her. "That's not true," she cried, her voice cracking. "Dr. Evans said the baby is perfectly healthy." "You were there. Dr. Evans is a sentimental fool," Beatrice cut in. "We sought a second opinion from a more reputable source. A specialist. The bloodline must be protected, Elara. You of all people should understand the importance of legacy." It was then that Isabella stood up, gracefully gliding over to Julian's side. She placed a delicate hand on his arm, her expression a facsimile of concern. "Julian, my love, perhaps this is for the best. We can start fresh. A new, healthy family." She then looked at Elara, her eyes gleaming with triumph. "You see, Elara, I can give Julian the kind of heir this family deserves." The implication hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Elara's world tilted on its axis. The late nights at the office, the scent of another woman's perfume on his clothes, the sudden coldness, it all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. You're having an affair," she gasped, looking at Julian. He didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. "It's more than an affair, Elara. It's a future. Isabella understands me. Her family understands our world. And the baby," Elara's hand trembled on her stomach. "Our baby." Beatrice stepped forward, her face a mask of finality. "That thing is your problem now, not ours." She pointed a long, bony finger at an antique Ming vase on a nearby pedestal, a piece she cherished. "You are as useless and fragile as that piece of pottery, a pretty decoration that serves no real purpose and breaks under the slightest pressure." To punctuate her point, she walked over, seized the vase, and hurled it to the floor. It exploded into 1,000 blue and white fragments. "This is what you are to us," Beatrice snarled, her voice rising to a fever pitch. "Broken, worthless, now get out of my house!" "No." Elara pleaded, tears streaming down her face as she sank to her knees among the shards. "Please don't do this. It's raining. I have nowhere to go. Think of your grandchild." Julian's face was unreadable, a stone facade. "My mother told you to leave." Two burly security guards, men who had always nodded politely to her, entered the room. They looked uncomfortable but resolute, their loyalty bought and paid for by Blackwood money. They took her by the arms, their grips firm but not yet brutal. "My things, my wallet, my phone," she stammered, the reality of the situation crashing down on her. "The staff will pack your personal effects. We will have them sent to a charity of our choosing," Beatrice said dismissively. "You came here with nothing, and you will leave with nothing." They dragged her through the grand foyer, past the sweeping staircase she had descended on her wedding day, her heart full of love and hope. The heavy oak doors were pulled open, revealing a wall of driving rain and howling wind. The cold night air hit her like a physical blow. With a final unceremonious shove, they pushed her out onto the stone portico. She stumbled, catching herself, just before she fell down the slick marble steps. Her thin silk dress was instantly soaked, clinging to her skin. The heavy doors boomed shut behind her, the sound of the deadbolt sliding into place, echoing her complete and utter banishment. She stood there for a moment, stunned into silence. The cold rain, plastering her hair to her face and mixing with her hot tears. The imposing facade of Blackwood Manor loomed behind her, its windows glowing with a warm golden light, a warmth she was now forever shut out from. She was 9 months pregnant, penniless, and alone, cast out into a storm with nothing but the life kicking inside her, and the broken pieces of a life she once thought was hers. The world beyond the iron gates of the Blackwood estate was a churning vortex of wind and water. Ilara's thin slippers were no match for the gravel of the long, winding driveway. Each step was a torturous effort, the sharp stones digging into her soles as the icy rain soaked her to the bone. The contractions, which had been mild Braxton Hicks for weeks, now began to grip her with a new, sharper intensity, a painful rhythm that mirrored the pounding of the storm. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through her shock. She had to get to safety, for her baby. The main road was miles away. No cars would be coming down this private lane tonight. Her only option was to walk. She wrapped her arms around her belly, trying to shield her unborn child from the cold, and began the agonizing trek. Headlights occasionally sliced through the darkness on the distant highway symbols of a world that was moving on without her, a world in which she no longer had a place. After what felt like an eternity, her legs trembling with exhaustion and cold, she reached the main road. The roar of passing trucks was deafening, their spray drenching her anew with every pass. She tried to flag someone down her arm, a dead weight she could barely lift. But she was just a ghost in the storm, a drenched, desperate wraith that drivers swerved to avoid. Defeated, she spotted a faint, flickering light through the trees off the side of the road. A sign read, "The Starlight Motel, Vacancy." It looked dilapidated, the kind of place people go when they have no other options. She was one of those people now. The motel office was a small, stuffy room that smelled of stale cigarette smoke and bleach. A balding man with a kind, tired face named George sat behind the counter, watching an old black-and-white movie on a small television. He looked up as she dripped onto his linoleum floor, his eyes widening with concern. "Good heavens, child, what happened to you? You look like you wrestled a hurricane." I need a room," Ilara stammered, her teeth chattering uncontrollably. "But I don't have any money. My husband, he threw me out." The words felt like ash in her mouth. George's expression softened from surprise to pity. He looked at her belly, then back at her pale, rain-streaked face. "Husband, huh? Well, any man who'd throw his pregnant wife out into a night like this isn't a husband. He's a monster." He sighed, running a hand over his head. "Look, I can't give you a room for free. The owner would have my hide. But, you can stay here in the office for a bit. Warm up. I've got a blanket in the back and some tea." Gratitude washed over Ilara so intensely it brought a fresh wave of tears. She sank into the worn vinyl chair he offered, accepting the thick, scratchy wool blanket he draped over her shoulders. The hot mug of tea he pressed into her hands was the first warmth she'd felt in hours. As she sipped the tea, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a profound, crushing despair. Her life was in ruins. She had no family to call. Her parents had passed away years ago in a car accident, leaving her with nothing but a small insurance policy she'd used for her college education. She had no friends nearby. Julian had systematically isolated her from her old life, deeming her acquaintances unsuitable. She was completely and utterly alone. A sharp, searing pain shot through her abdomen, making her gasp and clutch the mug tightly. George noticed immediately. "You all right there?" "It's the baby," she breathed, another wave of pain cresting. "The contractions, they're getting closer." Panic flared in George's eyes. Okay, stay calm. We need to call an ambulance." He reached for the phone. "No," Ilara cried out, the word torn from her. "I can't. I don't have insurance. Not anymore. It was tied to Julian's company. I can't afford a hospital." George paused, his hand hovering over the receiver. He looked at the desperate, terrified young woman before him, and a lifetime of quiet compassion stirred within him. "All right," he said softly, his decision made. "My sister Maria. She's a midwife. Retired, but she knows more than any 10 doctors. She lives just 15 minutes from here. Let me call her." The next hour was a blur. George helped her into his old rattling pickup truck, the heater blasting on full. He drove through the storm-ravaged streets to a small, neat house with a porch light burning like a beacon. A warm, round woman with salt and pepper hair and the calmest eyes Elara had ever seen met them at the door. This was Maria. She took one look at Elara and ushered her inside without a word, guiding her to a clean, simple bedroom in the back. The house smelled of cinnamon and lavender. It was the smell of safety. "Let's get you out of these wet things," Maria said, her voice a soothing balm. "George, put the kettle on, and bring the towels from the linen closet." Under Maria's expert care, Elara felt a sliver of her terror recede. Maria was efficient, kind, and asked no probing questions about how Elara had ended up in such a state. She only focused on the task at hand, the baby. As dawn approached, the storm outside began to subside, its fury spent. Inside the small house, Elara's own storm was reaching its crescendo. Through the haze of pain and exhaustion, she held on to Maria's steady presence and George's quiet words of encouragement from the hallway. And then, with the first rays of the morning sun filtering through the window, a new sound filled the room. The strong, healthy cry of a newborn baby. Maria gently cleaned the infant and wrapped her in a soft blanket before placing her in Elara's arms. "You have a beautiful, healthy daughter," she whispered, her eyes shining. Elara looked down at the tiny, perfect face, the small tuft of dark hair, the impossibly small fingers that curled around her own. All the pain, the betrayal, the heartbreak of the last 12 hours melted away, replaced by a fierce, primal love that was more powerful than anything she had ever known. This was her daughter, her family, her reason to fight. "Hello, little one," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm your mummy." She decided on a name right then, a name that meant light and hope. Aurora. Lying there, weak but resolute with baby Aurora, sleeping peacefully on her chest, Elara made a silent vow. She would not be a victim. She would not let the Blackwoods destroy her. For Aurora's sake, she would build a new life, a safe life, even if she had to do it with her bare hands, starting from nothing. She had no idea that nothing was about to change. Just as she was drifting into a much-needed sleep, a polite but firm knock echoed from the front door. George went to answer it. Elara could hear the low murmur of voices, one of them unfamiliar, a man's voice, cultured and precise. A moment later, George appeared at the bedroom door, a strange expression on his face. "Elara, there's a man here to see you. Says his name is Alistair Finch, a lawyer. He says it's a matter of the utmost urgency. He's talking about an inheritance." Elara sat up, clutching the blanket around her shoulders, Aurora sleeping soundly in a makeshift bassinet beside the bed. A lawyer. Here. It had to be a mistake, or worse, a trick sent by Julian to serve her with divorce papers and strip her of any possible claim. Fear, cold and familiar, coiled in her stomach again. "I don't want to see him," she told George weakly. "I think you should, honey," George said, his tone insistent. "He's not from around here. dressed in a suit that probably costs more than my truck. And he mentioned a name, Arthur Pendleton. The name meant nothing to Elara. I don't know anyone by that name. Just hear him out, George urged. Reluctantly, Elara agreed. Maria helped her into a clean, dry robe, and she made her way into the small, tidy living room. The man standing by the window was tall and impeccably dressed in a charcoal grey suit holding a leather briefcase. He had greying temples, sharp, intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and an air of quiet authority. He turned as she entered, and his stern expression softened with something that looked like relief. "Mrs. Blackwood Elara Croft, as you were?" he asked, his voice calm and respectful. "It's just Elara," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Who are you?" "My name is Alistair Finch. I am the executor of the estate of the late Mr. Arthur Pendleton. I must apologize for the intrusion, but I have been trying to locate you for several weeks. It has proven remarkably difficult." "I told George I don't know an Arthur Pendleton." Mr. Finch gave a small, sad smile. "I'm not surprised. Arthur was your maternal grandfather." Elara stared at him, utterly bewildered. Her mother, who had died when Elara was a teenager, rarely spoke of her family. She had always said they were estranged, that they had disowned her for marrying Elara's father, a simple librarian with a heart of gold, but no fortune to his name. She'd never even known her grandfather's name. "My grandfather," she repeated the words, feeling foreign on her tongue. "Indeed. Arthur Pendleton was a very private, very wealthy man. He and your mother, Elizabeth, had a falling out many years ago. It was a source of his deepest regret, a regret he sought to rectify. He spent years trying to find her, and when he finally succeeded, he learned she had tragically passed away. His search then shifted to you, his only living descendant." Alistair Finch opened his briefcase on the coffee table. The clicks of the latches were loud in the quiet room. He produced a thick, professionally bound document. "Mr. Pendleton passed away 2 months ago, at the age of 94, he continued gently. "He left behind a considerable estate, and a very specific last will and testament. Elara, he left everything to you." Elara felt the room spin. It was too much to process. The trauma of the night before the birth of her daughter, and now this. It felt like a dream, a feverish hallucination. "Everything. What? What is everything?" "Mr. Pendleton's portfolio is extensive." Mr. Finch said, his tone matter-of-fact. "Stocks International Properties, a significant art collection. But the centerpiece of his estate, his primary residence, is a property I believe you are familiar with. A place known as Willow Creek Manor." Elara shook her head. "I've never heard of it." Mr. Finch slid a large, glossy photograph from a folder and placed it on the table. Elara gasped. It was the mansion. The Blackwood Mansion. The grand, sprawling estate with its manicured lawns and towering oak trees. The house she had just been thrown out of. "No," she whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. That's Blackwood Manor. Julian's family has owned it for generations." A common misconception, and one Beatrice Blackwood was all too happy to perpetuate. Mr. Finch corrected her, a hint of steel in his voice. "The Blackwoods have never owned the estate. Arthur Pendleton was a man who valued his privacy above all else. 40 years ago, he granted Julian's father, Thomas Blackwood, a lifetime lease on the property for a nominal fee of $1 a year. It was a deal struck between old friends. Thomas was a decent man, and Arthur was happy to have the estate occupied and cared for. The terms of the lease were simple. The lease would remain in effect for the duration of Thomas's life and could be extended to his wife Beatrice upon his passing. However, the lease explicitly states that it is terminated immediately upon her death, or should the legal ownership of the property transfer to Mr. Pendleton's designated heir. Thomas passed away 5 years ago. Beatrice has been living there on borrowed time. He tapped the will. Upon my death, ownership of the Willow Creek Manor and all its contents transfers immediately and irrevocably to my granddaughter Elara Croft. The lifetime lease granted to the Blackwood family is hereby terminated effective the moment my heir takes possession. Elara's mind reeled, trying to connect the dots. Julian and Beatrice knew. They must have known. Their entire life, their social standing, their identity. It was all built on a lie, a borrowed foundation. Why didn't they ever tell me? She asked, the scope of their deception dawning on her. Greed, Mr. Finch said simply, and arrogance. I have been managing Mr. Pendleton's affairs for 30 years. After his passing, I sent certified letters to the residents addressed to you. They were repeatedly returned marked unknown occupant. Beatrice and Julian were actively hiding your identity from us, hoping to contest the will and claim squatters' rights or draw out the legal process for years. They likely assumed you would never discover the truth. He leaned forward slightly. Last night I decided on a more direct approach. I came to the manor myself to deliver the documents in person. I arrived just in time to witness a most distressing scene. I saw them force you out into the storm. I followed you, ensuring your safety from a distance, which is how I found you here. Forgive me for not intervening sooner, but I needed to assess the situation and ensure I approached you at the right time. The cruelty I witnessed last night. It has made my duty today not only a professional one, but a personal one. Elara looked from the photograph of the mansion to the face of the kind lawyer, and then thought of Aurora, her tiny, precious daughter. The despair she had felt just hours ago began to recede, replaced by a slow-burning ember of righteous anger. They hadn't just thrown her out. They had thrown her out of her own home. They had cast her aside while living on her family's legacy, a legacy they had tried to steal from her. What happens now? She asked, her voice stronger, now clearer. Alistair Finch closed his briefcase, a look of grim satisfaction on his face. Now we follow Mr. Pendleton's wishes to the letter. First we see to your and your daughter's immediate needs. I have a suite reserved for you at the Four Seasons downtown. We will arrange for medical care clothes, anything you require. We will give you a few hours to rest and recover. And then he paused, allowing the weight of his next words to land. Then we go back to the manor. Not as Elara Blackwood, the discarded wife, but as Elara Pendleton Croft, the rightful owner of the estate, and you will tell them to leave. The image was so staggering, so impossible, that Elara almost laughed. Yesterday she was a charity case. Today she was a landlady. The ultimate irony was not lost on her. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been completely upended. They won't leave without a fight, she said, thinking of Beatrice's venomous pride. Oh, I am counting on it, Mr. Finch replied, a predatory gleam in his eye. Mr. Pendleton was a meticulous man. The will is ironclad and the lease termination is non-negotiable. I have already notified local law enforcement of a potential trespassing situation at the property, should the current occupants refuse to vacate. We, Miss Croft, have every advantage. He stood up, offering her a hand. Are you ready to claim your birthright? Looking at her sleeping daughter, the innocent heir to this incredible hidden legacy, Elara found a strength she never knew she possessed. She took his hand, her grip firm. Yes, she said, her voice ringing with newfound resolve. I am. The suite at the Four Seasons was a world away from the Starlight Motel. It was a palace in the sky with panoramic views of the city rooms larger than Maria's entire house and a bathroom clad in Italian marble. But for Elara, its greatest luxury was safety. Mr. Finch, ever the consummate professional, had orchestrated everything with quiet efficiency. A discreet doctor was summoned to check on both Elara and baby Aurora, pronouncing them both healthy and strong despite their ordeal. A personal shopper from Bergdorf Goodman arrived with an entire rack of clothing for Elara. Elegant cashmere sweaters, tailored trousers, silk blouses, and a stunning, perfectly fitted navy blue dress made of heavy wool crepe. There were also bags filled with everything a newborn could possibly need, from the softest organic cotton onesies to a state-of-the-art bassinet. For the first time in 2 years, Elara was not choosing clothes to please Beatrice or to fit the mold of the demure Mrs. Blackwood. She was choosing for herself. The navy dress felt like armor. It was sophisticated, powerful, and understated. It was the dress of a woman who was in control. While Elara showered and dressed, Mr. Finch sat in the suite's living room, briefing her on the Pendleton estate. He laid out financial statements, property deeds, and a portfolio summary that made her head spin. The numbers were astronomical beyond anything she could have comprehended. She was not just wealthy, she was one of the wealthiest women in the state. But it was the personal file on her grandfather that truly captured her attention. It contained old photographs, letters he had written but never sent to her mother, and a handwritten journal. As Aurora slept peacefully, Elara read through her grandfather's words. Arthur Pendleton was not the cold, distant tycoon she might have imagined. His writing revealed a man of deep intellect, quiet humor, and profound loneliness. He wrote of his heartbreak over the rift with his daughter Elizabeth. He detailed his regrets, his pride, and his desperate hope to one day find her and her child. In one entry dated just a year ago, he wrote, "I see her face in strangers. My Elizabeth. I failed her. I let my stubborn pride build a wall between us, and now that wall is insurmountable. But if her child is out there, if my grandchild breathes the same air, I will not fail again. Everything I have built, this empire of steel and glass, it is all meaningless without blood. It is all for her. A home, a fortress, a future. A legacy she doesn't even know she has." Tears welled in Elara's eyes. This was the man whose blood ran in her veins. This was the source of her inheritance. It wasn't just money and property. It was a grandfather's love reaching out to her from beyond the grave. It solidified her resolve. She wasn't doing this for revenge. She was doing this to honor him, to fulfill his final wish, and to build the safe fortress for Aurora that he had intended. Alistair Finch watched her, his expression unreadable. "He would have been incredibly proud of you," he said softly. "Your resilience. He always valued strength of character above all else." "They thought my character was my weakness," Elara murmured, folding a letter carefully. "My quietness, my desire to keep the peace. They saw it as fragility. The willow tree bends in the wind, while the mighty oak cracks," Mr. Finch quoted. "Your grandfather had that saying framed in his study. He would appreciate the irony of his estate being named Willow Creek Manor." A new sense of self began to settle over Elara. The frightened, pleading woman from the night before was gone. In her place was a mother, a granddaughter, an heiress. The transformation was more than just the designer dress and the luxury suite. It was internal. A fire had been lit, forged in the crucible of betrayal, and ignited by the revelation of her heritage. By mid-afternoon, she was ready. She fed Aurora, swaddled her in a cashmere blanket, and placed her gently into the secure car seat Mr. Finch had procured. Elara looked at her reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back was someone she barely recognized. Her eyes, though tired, held a new, unyielding light. There was a quiet confidence in her posture, a set to her jaw that had not been there before. She was no longer just Elara. She was the last of the Pendleton line. Downstairs, a black Lincoln Navigator, the epitome of discreet power, was waiting for them. A driver held the door open. Mr. Finch sat in the passenger seat, while Elara settled in the back with Aurora. As the car pulled away from the curb and headed toward the familiar tree-lined roads leading to the estate, a calm certainty settled over her. She wasn't returning to the scene of her humiliation. She was going home. "Are you ready?" Alistair asked, turning slightly in his seat to look at her. Elara adjusted Aurora's blanket, her hand resting protectively on the car seat. She thought of Julian's cold eyes, Beatrice's venomous words, and Isabella's triumphant smirk. She thought of the cold rain, the fear, the despair. And then she thought of her grandfather's journal and the sleeping baby beside her. "They have no idea what's coming," she said, her voice perfectly even. "Let's go." The car turned onto the long private driveway. The grand facade of Willow Creek Manor rose up before them, magnificent and imposing. The Blackwood family crest, a pompous and gaudy addition, was mounted above the door. Elara made a mental note to have it removed first thing. The car didn't stop at the grand entrance. It swept past, following the curve of the drive toward the main gates, then pulled to a stop just outside. "Why are we stopping here?" Elara asked. "Protocol." Mr. Finch said, a faint smile on his lips, as he gestured to a second identical black SUV that had pulled up behind them. "The transfer of property must be official. First, we secure the perimeter." Out of the second vehicle stepped 2 uniformed police officers and a locksmith. One of the officers approached their window. "Mr. Finch, we're ready when you are, ma'am," he said, nodding respectfully to Elara. "It's time, Elara," Alistair said. "The locks on the gate and all the doors to the manor are about to be changed. Once that process begins for legal purposes, anyone inside who refuses to leave is officially trespassing." Elara took a deep breath, the phoenix rising from the ashes of her old life. She was ready to reclaim her kingdom. The locksmith, a man named Dave, with efficient, no-nonsense hands, made quick work of the electronic gate controls. With a soft whir and a decisive click, the old system was disabled and a new one installed. He handed a small remote to Mr. Finch. "It's all yours," Dave said. Mr. Finch passed the remote to Elara. Her fingers closed around the cool plastic. It was the first key to her new life. With a press of a button, the grand iron gates of Willow Creek Manor swung open at her command. "Shall we?" Alistair prompted. Their Lincoln Navigator led the way, gliding smoothly up the driveway. They didn't park discreetly to the side. The driver pulled directly in front of the main entrance, blocking the circular drive with an assertion of indisputable presence. The front doors opened before they could even step out of the car. Beatrice Blackwood emerged, dressed in a sharp tweed suit, her face a mask of furious confusion. Julian and Isabella followed close behind Julian, looking irritated. Isabella, looking bored. They had clearly seen the procession from a window. "What is the meaning of this?" Beatrice demanded, her voice sharp enough to cut glass as Elara stepped out of the vehicle. "Have you come back to beg? I knew you didn't have the spine to make it on your own. And who are these people? The police? Are you trying to harass us?" Elara said nothing. She simply walked to the rear of the car where the driver was already unbuckling Aurora's car seat and gently lifted her sleeping daughter into her arms. Cradling her baby, she turned to face her former family. Julian's eyes flickered from Elara's expensive dress and confident posture to the imposing figure of Alistair Finch. A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. "Elara, what is this? What have you done? It's not what I've done, Julian." Elara replied, her voice calm and steady, betraying none of the nervous energy thrumming beneath the surface. "It's about what you have done. What you have all done." Mr. Finch stepped forward, his leather briefcase in hand. "Beatrice Blackwood, Julian Blackwood. My name is Alistair Finch. I am the legal executor of the estate of the late Arthur Pendleton, the legal and sole owner of this property." Beatrice scoffed. "Pendleton? That old recluse has been dead for months. This is Blackwood Manor. Our family has lived here for 40 years. You have resided here," Mr. Finch corrected smoothly, opening his briefcase. "Under the terms of a lifetime lease granted to you by Mr. Pendleton. A lease which, according to Section 4, Paragraph B, is rendered null and void upon the legal transfer of the property to his designated heir." He produced the will, its blue ribbon a stark contrast to the grey sky. "And as per his last will and testament, as of 2 months ago, 100% of the Pendleton estate, including this house, and all 50 acres of land it sits upon, was transferred to his sole surviving descendant." He paused, letting the silence hang in the air, before delivering the final devastating blow. He gestured toward Elara. "Meet Elara Pendleton Croft, your landlord, and your eviction notice." The colour drained from Beatrice's face. Julian stared at Elara, his mouth slightly agape, as if seeing her for the first time. Disbelief, confusion, and the dawning horror of comprehension warred in his expression. Isabella was the first to recover, letting out a tinkling, incredulous laugh. "You can't be serious. She's a nobody, an orphan you picked up from a state college. This is some kind of pathetic trick." "The documentation is all here," Mr. Finch said, unfazed. He handed a thick packet to one of the police officers, who began to review it. "The deed to the property in Mr. Pendleton's name, the original lease agreement signed by Thomas and Beatrice Blackwood, the notarized last will and testament, and the official transfer of title to my client." The officer looked up after a moment. "It all seems to be in order, ma'am," he said, addressing Beatrice, but with a newfound tone of formality. The reality began to crash down on the Blackwoods. Julian took a stumbling step forward. "Elara, is this true? Your grandfather, the grandfather you never allowed me to know about," Elara said, her voice laced with ice. "The letters from his lawyer you returned to sender. The legacy you tried to hide from me while you lived in his house, enjoying his generosity, all while treating me like dirt." Beatrice's face contorted with rage, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. "You lie. This is a forgery. This house is ours." "It has never been yours," Elara stated flatly. "You've been tenants, and your lease is terminated. I am the owner of Willow Creek Manor now." She took a step toward the door, her gaze unwavering. "I am giving you 1 hour to pack your personal belongings and vacate the premises. Anything left behind after that will be disposed of." "1 hour," Julian sputtered. "That's insane. We live here. All of our things are here." "You should have thought of that last night when you threw me and your unborn child out into a storm with nothing but the clothes on my back." Elara shot back, her voice rising with controlled fury. You were quite content to leave me with nothing. Consider 1 hour a profound generosity." Isabella rushed to Julian's side, her mask of amusement replaced by panic. "Julian, do something. You can't let her do this. What about our merger? My father will never do business with a homeless family." Julian looked wildly from Isabella to Elara, his mind clearly racing for an angle. "Elara, wait. We're still married. That means half of this is mine, right? By law, spousal rights." Mr. Finch stepped forward again, a grim smile touching his lips. "Another contingency for which the prescient Mr. Pendleton prepared. Allow me to introduce you to Clause 12, the character and conduct provision of the inheritance." He pulled out another document. "It stipulates that any individual who marries the heir and is later found through a preponderance of evidence to have acted with malice, infidelity, or committed acts of profound moral turpitude against said heir, forfeits any and all community property, claims to the inherited assets." He then slid a slim, unmarked envelope from his briefcase and handed it to Julian. "I believe you'll find this preponderance of evidence quite convincing. It's the full report from the private investigator I hired weeks ago, detailing your affair with Miss Vance, including transcripts of conversations where you discuss your plan to have Elara declared an unfit mother and seize her expected inheritance for yourselves. It seems you overestimated your own cunning and profoundly underestimated your wife's grandfather." Julian's face went from pale to ashen as he looked at the envelope. Isabella recoiled as if it were a venomous snake. They were caught, utterly and completely. Elara walked past them up the stone steps she had been thrown down just the night before. She paused at the threshold, turning to face them one last time. Her baby Aurora stirred in her arms, a soft, sleepy sound. "The clock is ticking," Elara said, her voice echoing with the finality of a judge's gavel. Then she looked directly at Beatrice, the woman who had orchestrated her deepest pain. "Get out of my house." With that, she turned her back on them, stepped over the threshold, and walked into her home, leaving them standing on the driveway with the ruins of their stolen lives. The hour that followed was a symphony of chaotic, impotent fury. From the drawing room where Elara sat calmly feeding Aurora, she could hear the sounds of the Blackwoods world unraveling. There were slammed doors, Beatrice's screeching commands to overwhelmed staff, and the frantic, hushed arguments between Julian and Isabella. True to her word at the 60-minute mark, Elara, with Mr. Finch by her side, walked to the grand foyer. The scene was one of comical disarray. Several suitcases were packed haphazardly, but the bulk of their opulent possessions remained. Beatrice stood amidst it all, a defiant queen on a sinking ship, her face a thunderous mask of pride. "This is not over," she hissed as Elara approached. "We have lawyers, powerful friends. You will not get away with this theft." "The only thief here is you, Beatrice," Elara replied coolly. "You've been living a lie for 40 years. Your powerful friends will be interested to learn that the formidable Blackwoods are in fact penniless tenants." Just then Julian came rushing down the stairs, his face slick with sweat. He ignored his mother and made a beeline for Elara, his demeanor shifting from arrogant to desperately pleading. "Elara, baby, listen to me," he began, his voice dropping to the intimate tone he used to use when he wanted something. "I was a fool, a complete idiot. I let my mother and Isabella poison my mind. But that baby, she's my daughter. You can't take my daughter away from me." Before Elara could respond, Isabella appeared at the top of the stairs, her face streaked with mascara. Your daughter, she shrieked, her voice raw with hysteria. What about our baby, Julian? You promised me. You said we would raise our child here. This was a twist Elara hadn't expected. She looked at Isabella's perfectly flat stomach, then back at Julian's panicked face. Julian whirled around. Isabella, shut up. Now is not the time. No, I won't shut up, she screamed, descending the stairs like a vengeful fury. He's been lying to all of you. She pointed a trembling manicured finger at Julian. There is no baby. There was never going to be a baby. He told me to fake a pregnancy to give him leverage to get rid of her. She spat the word at Elara. He said it would make the upgrade look better to his business partners. The revelation hung in the air, stunning even Beatrice into silence. The entire premise for kicking Elara out the lie about her unhealthy baby, the need for a healthy Blackwood heir, was a complete fabrication built on another fabrication. It was a house of cards built on a swamp. Julian looked utterly exposed, a cornered rat with nowhere left to run. She's lying. She's hysterical. Am I? Isabella retorted, a wild look in her eyes. Or are you the liar, Julian, the one who also failed to mention that your family's company, Blackwood Holdings, is on the verge of bankruptcy, that the merger with my father was your last-ditch effort to get a bailout? I just got off the phone with my father. He knows everything. The deal is off. We're ruined because of you. The final pillar of the Blackwood facade crumbled. Their wealth was gone. Their home was gone. Their reputation was about to be incinerated in the high society gossip columns. They had nothing. Beatrice seemed to age 20 years in a single moment. She sank onto a packed suitcase, her face a hollow mask of defeat. The fight was gone, replaced by the vacant stare of someone who has lost everything. Julian, however, made one last desperate move. He lunged toward Elara, his hands outstretched not in violence, but in a grotesque pantomime of supplication. Elara, please, forgive me. We can fix this. I love you. I always have. The police officer, who had been standing quietly by the door, stepped forward, his hand resting on his service weapon. Sir, I suggest you keep your distance from the lady. Elara didn't flinch. She simply looked at the man she had once loved, the father of her child, and felt nothing but a cold, empty pity. The only thing you ever loved, Julian, was the idea of this house, the name, the power you thought it gave you. But it was never yours to love, and neither was I. She turned away from him, a final, complete dismissal. Officer, the hour is up. Please escort these trespassers from my property. The officer nodded. Mr. Blackwood, Mrs. Blackwood, Miss Vance. It's time to go. There was no more fight, no more bluster. Like ghosts, they were ushered out of the grand doors. A taxi, which Mr. Finch had thoughtfully summoned, was waiting for them at the bottom of the steps, a final humiliating punctuation mark on their fall from grace. They would not be leaving in a Bentley or a Rolls-Royce, but in a common yellow cab. Elara watched them go from the doorway. She saw Julian and Isabella arguing on the curb, Beatrice staring blankly at the house she had ruled for so long. As the taxi pulled away, disappearing down the long drive, a profound silence descended upon the manor. It was the first time since she had arrived that the air didn't feel heavy with tension. It felt clean. It felt like hers. Mr. Finch came to stand beside her. It is done. Yes, Elara said, a deep, cleansing breath filling her lungs. She looked down at Aurora, who had slept through the entire ordeal. Now the real work begins. Her first act as the lady of Willow Creek Manor was to call the head of staff, a kindly older butler named Mr. Henderson, whom Beatrice had always treated with contempt. "Mr. Henderson," she said, her voice clear and kind, "I would like you to arrange for every lock in this house to be changed by morning. And please put on a fresh pot of coffee. I believe we have a lot to discuss about the future." The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity, but it was a chaos of creation, not destruction. Elara, with the steadfast Alistair Finch as her guide, dove headfirst into understanding her new responsibilities. She learned that her grandfather's empire wasn't just a pile of money. It was a functioning web of businesses and investments. More importantly, it included a well-endowed charitable foundation, the Pendleton Foundation, which focused on providing housing and educational grants for single mothers and orphans. It was a revelation. Arthur Pendleton had channeled the pain of losing his daughter into helping others in similar situations. For Elara, this was the most precious part of her inheritance. It was a mission, a purpose. She made immediate changes at the manor. The ostentatious, gaudy decor favored by Beatrice was carefully packed away and replaced with the tasteful, elegant pieces that had been in storage her grandfather's collection. The house began to feel less like a sterile showroom and more like a home. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by one of quiet respect and warmth. She rehired staff that Beatrice had fired for petty reasons, earning their fierce loyalty. Mr. Henderson, the butler, now walked with a lighter step, a genuine smile replacing his formerly strained professional one. News of the Blackwood's spectacular fall from grace ripped through their social circle. The society pages of the New York Post and Vanity Fair had a field day. Julian Blackwood, the disgraced heir, was facing lawsuits from creditors. Isabella Vance's family, embarrassed and furious, had decamped to their villa in Monaco to escape the scandal. Beatrice, the fallen queen, was reportedly staying with a distant cousin in a cramped apartment in Queens, a fate she would have once considered worse than death. One afternoon, about a week after she had reclaimed her home, a letter arrived. It was from Julian, hand-delivered by a courier. It was not a legal threat, but a rambling 12-page plea. He begged for forgiveness, for a second chance, for financial support. He even attempted to use Aurora as a bargaining chip, speaking of a father's right to see his daughter. Elara read the letter, her expression unreadable. Then she walked to the fireplace in her grandfather's study, now her study, and dropped the letter into the flames. She would not allow Julian to be a part of Aurora's life, not until he had truly atoned for his actions and proven he was no longer a danger to their well-being. She would, however, instruct Mr. Finch to set up a small, anonymous trust managed by a third party to ensure Julian never became completely destitute. It wasn't forgiveness. It was a final act of severing a quiet closing of a chapter, ensuring he would never have a reason to bother her or her daughter again. It was a mercy he didn't deserve, but one she gave freely for her own peace of mind. A few months later, on a crisp autumn afternoon, Elara stood on the grand terrace overlooking the sprawling lawns of the estate. The trees were ablaze with color, and the air was clean and fresh. Aurora, now a happy, gurgling baby, was in a carrier on her chest, her small hand clutching the simple gold locket Elara always wore. Alistair Finch joined her, holding 2 mugs of steaming tea. He was more than a lawyer now. He was a mentor, a confidant, and a friend. "The board of the foundation approved your proposal," he said, handing her a mug. "The new wing for the women's shelter will be named the Elizabeth Croft Center, in honor of your mother." A real smile, bright and genuine, lit up Ilara's face. "Thank you, Alistair, for everything." "I'm merely fulfilling my duty to your grandfather," he said, though his warm tone suggested otherwise. "He would be so pleased, Ilara. You haven't just inherited his wealth, you've inherited his spirit." Ilara looked out at the vast expanse of her land, her home. She had been thrown from this place with nothing, only to return and claim everything. But the true victory wasn't the mansion or the money. It was the discovery of her own strength. It was the love for her daughter. It was the connection to a grandfather she never knew, and the chance to continue his legacy of kindness. The Blackwoods had believed legacy was about bloodlines, prestige, and power. Ilara now understood that a true legacy was about the good you leave behind in the world. As she held her daughter close, feeling the steady beat of her tiny heart against her own, she knew her work was just beginning. She was not just the lady of Willow Creek Manor. She was the guardian of its future, the architect of a new legacy, one built not on arrogance and lies, but on resilience, compassion, and a mother's unending love. And so Ilara's story comes to a close, not with an act of revenge, but with the quiet, powerful dawn of a new beginning. She teaches us that true strength isn't about the absence of hardship, but how we rise after we have been broken. She walked out of that mansion a victim and returned a victor, not because of the money she inherited, but because she discovered the unshakable power within herself, the power of a mother's love and the resilience of the human spirit. Her story is a powerful reminder that sometimes our greatest trials lead us to our true destiny, and that the grandest estate is the one we build within our own hearts. If this story of resilience and ultimate triumph moved you, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their own inner strength. And for more stories that will empower and inspire, you don't forget to subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell. What would you have done in Ilara's shoes? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for listening.